Hi everyone, welcome. Just gonna wait a few minutes. Um, okay. Hi everyone, my name is Carolina. I'm from Word Up Community Bookshop, Librería Comunitaria. During this event, feel free to add comments in the chat panel, which you can access by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to put them there. If you're joining us on YouTube, feel free to comment and we'll bring them into the chat on Zoom. If you don't know Word Up, we're a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. We started as a 1 month long pop up shop in 2011, then stuck around due to overwhelming community demand. And this past June, we actually celebrated 11 years. Um, so we're really excited for our next anniversary. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street and Washington Heights, New York City. We host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish. You can check us out at wordupbooks.com to shop, see other events that we're hosting. You could have been at the shop today, but things happen. And we're usually open Tuesdays through Saturdays, 12 to 6. We also just opened up a second location called Recirculation at the corner of 160th and Riverside Drive. This space came about because a former Word Up collective member sadly passed away from COVID, and he left us in charge of all of his books and records, which we are using to recirculate, which is where the name comes from. And all the books in there are pay what you can. We have a lot more events there because it's just a much larger space. So if you're interested in joining us on that endeavor, please check us out at recirculation.nyc on Instagram, or you can email us at recirculation@wordupbooks.com. I'm going to pass it on to Angie Abreu from Dominican Writers Association.
Que lo que, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. Happy Wednesday. My name is Angie Abreu, and I'm the founder of Dominican Writers Association. And today we have the pleasure of being here in conversation for a reading of Roberto Carlos Garcia. What can I tell you? If you do not have a copy of this book, please pass by Word Up and get yourself a copy, or you can go to wordup.com and order the copy, which they will also ship out to you, okay? So if you don't know who Roberto is, get to know him, okay? Roberto writes about Afro-Latinx and Afro-diasporic experience. His work has been published widely in places like Poetry, The Root, Breakbeat Poets Volume 4, Latinx, Bettering American Poetry Volume 3, and others. He is the author of 5 books, including 4 poetry collections. Melancholia, published by Cervena Barba Press in 2016. Black Maybe, an Afro-lyric published by Willow Books in 2018. Elegies, published by Flower Song and Press in 2020, and recently published What Can I Tell You? The Selected Poems of Roberto Carlos Garcia, also by Flower Song Press. And he has also published one essay collection called Traveling Freely, forthcoming in 2024. Roberto, tú estás busy. And this is coming from Northwestern University Press. Roberto is the founder of Get Fresh Books Publishing, which is also a literary nonprofit. And here we have one of our favorite Dominican academics and professor, la doctora Zaida Corniel. She is an academic, an actor, and a writer. She is a lecturer at the Department of Hispanic Languages at Stony Brook University and teaches also at the Department of Latin America and Latino Studies at Lehman College. Her work focuses on Latinx studies, touristic discourse, and representation of the Caribbean subjectivities in contemporary narratives. She is the author of the short story collection Para Adolescentes Premenopáusicas y Especialistas de la Salud. That is not an academic book. Trust me, you should pick it up and read it. It is very interesting. And I kind of forgot you put that book out there, Zaida, but I'm about to remind people about your book. So now that I've introduced these great people, these great Dominican writers, I'm going to leave it up to you both to start your conversation.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much, Angie, for the presentation and for inviting me, Roberto, to be here. Thank you for Word Up also for the organization. It will be my pleasure to talk to you and to hear from you, reading your poem and your test. So I would like to start saying something that we had added. We invited to this conversation to talk about the borders inside the nations. We said that we were going to address racial discourses and also the African diaspora counter-narrative, among other topics. But indeed, we are going to do that. We are going to have this conversation, but also this book, I want to mention, this book is about grief, about love, a lot of love, and love as an act of resistance and liberation, the way the bell hook described it. In this book, what can I tell you? Selected points. Roberto put together 3 books that he published in different moments of his career. The first one is Melancolía, Melancholy in Spanish, the title. Also, Black Maybe, that was the first book of Roberto that I read, that I connected with him when I read this book, immediately spoke to me. Because Roberto has this capacity as a writer that he challenges the reader. And that's one of the things that caught my attention when I read him. Actually, I put him in my syllabus in Lehman College in a course that I'm teaching, Dominican American Literature, because he's an interesting voice. I think it's something that we need to pay attention, what he's writing about. Also, the book, the last one is Elegies. And in this test, as I mentioned before, he interpelled the reader. So he needs a reader that is active, because he questioned it, he made you think. For example, the title, What Can I Tell You? When I see the title, that reminds me, in Spanish, we have the same expression, ¿qué te puedo decir? ¿No? What can I tell you? ¿Qué te puedo decir? And that expression opened up many possibilities, but also it leaves a space there for concern, for that leaves you like thinking, no? You keep thinking. Maybe you don't have the words, you don't have the answer at the moment, but it leaves you with that sense that you need to answer something or searching for something, no? So this book, Silvio Torres Ayant states in the prologue that he wrote for this collection, he said that these poems command attention. And I agree 100% with him. This test here, because doesn't only have poem, he also has short essays, reflections. It's a very hybrid. We are going to talk about that, and that's one of my questions also, about how you put together this book, no? So that's how we are going to be talking, and I want to start with my question, talking about the first book, Melancolía. Here's the book. You see how I have been reading and marking. I have reread the poem.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my first question has to do with, how would you describe the act of writing? For example, in Melancolía, you express that this book is a product of my sacred struggle with melancholia, no? But you, as a poem, and I will be asking you to read this first text, because it's a beautiful text also, the lyricism in this short essay. Also, I would like to hear from your own voice. But as a poet, you take this term, no, that is a medical term, and you take it farther, no, from medical definition that relates melancholia with a physical or emotional, no, condition, and instead you decide to take it, to compare that with the struggle of a poet searching for the expression, no? that necessity that the poem, something that is very antique, the idea of a poem grabbing the reality with words.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Right. So I would like to ask you again the question, uh, but then we can think about the beauty, no? The beauty, and I quote, no, and you, even though you're going to read it, say, it makes a poet, so describing melancholia, it makes a poet age for the beauty and the brevity of life, no? But then you place melancholia in the social terrain too. After a while, you go farther and you say, no, melancholia is also, and you talk about us. And that us is very interesting because is us in there, no? The poetic voice. It says, due to racism and lack of social justice. Then how have been for you this struggle through writing? That's my question. And I will ask you to share with us this test.
So I'll read it. It's a short opening prose piece to that text, Melancolia. And at first I want to say thank you so much for being here and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And for reading so closely. So Melancolia is as easily defined as its elusive cousin, duende, which is another way of saying it is indefinable. Ancient and medieval physicians believed an excess of one or more of the 4 primary bodily fluids caused it. I won't bore you with that. You can Google it or visit a library. I'm more interested in what it does to poets, in the way melancholia makes poets long for things that have been, that have yet to pass, and that might have never existed. It makes a poet ache for the beauty and the brevity of life, the fleeting scent and brightness of the rose's many dresses, of spring and summer's shifting heat, and for the childhood that could have been. Melancholia is thirst for joy, and believe it or not, pain. It is the heat of lust and the shame of lusting, of not being able to have the thing or person you desire. Melancholia is pure longing and the restless, depressed, and wretched anxiety of longing. And yet, it is significantly more complicated than that. We experience melancholia physically. In her essay collection, Sidewalks, Valeria Luiselli describes symptoms of melancholia as sadness, crying, stress, headaches, chest pains, insomnia, fatigue, and hallucinations. I'd also add a peculiar unquenchable thirst for wine. These pains must be expressed, poured out, painted, sung, or written. The struggle must be given life. Here is where the evil little cousin, duende, knocks incessantly at our door. Melancholia feeds the monster. It feeds duende. Garcia Lorca wrote, "We only know that he, duende, burns the blood like a poultice of broken glass, that he exhausts, that he rejects all the sweet geometry we have learned, that he smashes styles, that he leans on human pain with no consolation." He also wrote that an old maestro of the guitar told him the duende then is a power, not a work. It is a struggle, not a thought. I take thought to mean overthinking, the draining of life from the artistic idea, leaving the body and retiring completely into the mind, trying to shake off melancholia, to shake off the pain or experience that feeds the art. What then causes melancholia in us? What brings on our symptoms? Is it the world's lack of social justice? Is it racism? Is it war? Is it heartbreak? The death of loved ones, the fear of death, the accumulation of perceived slights and offenses, loneliness, unrequited love, unfulfilled desire, the fear of God or heaven or hell, the lack of courage, poverty, the overwhelming ignorance pervading our world, the endless list of isms and phobias, the apocalypse, the death of a rose. How then to express this? To be a poet that masters melancholia and the mysterious and dangerous outburst of expression that is duende. I don't pretend to know, but I give in to it. I simply enjoy the struggle, the fight to understand, not thought, but contemplation, like a Sufi seeking truth. This book is a product of my sacred struggle with melancholia. So this idea of being a struggle, right? Of melancholia as something more than sickness, because what would happen to soldiers, right, in the old world is the experience of leaving home, whether they were innocent or, whatever, going and experiencing the world, whether it be the violence of war, heartbreak, etc. Sometimes they would come back and be terribly sad, not be able to shake the sadness of what they had seen and done as they try to kind of make sense of the world. But then there's also young people who had an affinity for art that carried that same kind of idea or sadness. And they defined it, the people around the other people experiencing melancholia would define it as sadness, right? As there's another word for it, almost like when someone is lackadaisical, right? We would say, what's the word we would say in Spanish? We would say, in English it's lackadaisical, but I think in Spanish there's a word and I can't think of it right now. But they associate it with an overproduction of bile. And they would say, this is what's causing it, and they do crazy things like cut people open and put leeches on them. But what was confusing is that they, at first they wanted to assign this to trauma. They wanted to assign melancholia to traumatic experience, but that wasn't the case, because even the children of wealthy people that were apprenticed to artists, even they were expressing melancholia, and they had everything, right? So it wasn't just here, it was also physical. And in my training as a writer, I was always encouraged and taught to write about the body, to write the body and how the body experiences everything, right? And so melancholia is a very physical thing for me, not just spirit. It is spiritual, it is emotional, but it is also very physical, because we're physical beings. And so even if a person isn't an artist or someone that expresses themselves through art, they experience melancholia, and they may not express it artistically, but they experience it physically, and sometimes may or may not know what to do with it, right? But for me, then, the struggle is, going back to your point about, ¿qué te puedo decir? Like, what can I tell you, right? We use this expression. In particular, this is an expression that I have always heard in my whole life growing up. My grandmother, ¿Cómo está Alta Gracia? ¿Qué te puedo decir? Right? Like, how are you? Or what can I tell you? Because there's so much to tell, right? Like, where to begin? And so the idea is not just, okay, where to begin, but also, how can I make sense of all of this for you, right? The words aren't enough. And so I think anybody who writes recognizes the difficulty of expressing things with words. And so this is also why it's a struggle, because it's a struggle to say the thing and say it in a way that you feel is communicating exactly what you want to communicate. But that also is hopefully in a way that people will recognize, because I think that as artistic people, we're recreating the world for people, whether it's a poem or a novel or whatever, but they also have to be able to recognize some part of their world in what we are creating. And so that's it makes it a struggle, on top of dealing with all of the emotions and and everything like that.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you. I have another questions about, I mentioned it before, that this book incorporates various narrative, no? Like, for example, the text that you just read it's like a reflection, no? It's like your article. So there is very hybrid, no? You have poetry, but you also have this kind of test, like reflection, and also some academic sources. You use some academic format. You have included sources, no?
Mhm.
Like bibliography, notes. That is, it's a very academic format. So I would like you to tell me about the process for writing and putting together, no, this book.
One of the things that happens a lot in our communities, right? Communities of color, whether that be African American, Caribbean, Latinx, Asian, Muslim, Indigenous, is that people steal our ideas and don't cite us. Right? They read our text, they're inspired by what we write, and they don't cite us. And part of it for me was creating a practice of citing the people who either inspire the text, the places where, in particular in Black Maybe, because I was moved by so many Afro-diasporic communities, you know, the African American community, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latinx, you know, Africa itself, the continent, right?
And this is also the one of my next question about that connection. Before you continue, I'm sorry to open this parenthesis because I forgot another source that you use in the structure of this book, specifically in Black Maybe, is the chorus. The chorus is like reminiscent of the Greek tragedy. No?
Yes.
And there, now that you mentioned the African American writers, that James Baldwin having this dialogue, so
Yeah.
we add that to what I mentioned before. Thank you.
So yeah, no problem. So for me, it was very important to cite those sources, you know, as obviously as my inspiration, but then also so that people know where to go to find out more, to learn more, to be illuminated, I guess, in the way I was illuminated by what I found. Because I think that's another thing that a friend of mine, she was the librarian at the college where I teach. She retired, but she would always say, "You want to hide something? Put it in a book." Because nobody will read it, nobody will find it. And so it's always so hard to find these sources, right? It's always so hard to like find this information because obviously they hide it from us. That whenever I can, I want to provide that to anybody who takes the time to read my book. I want them to be able to look in the back of the book and find further reading, right? And know where to go, because I draw from a lot of traditions, you know, Black arts movement, the Spanish poets of 1938 or 1929. I love that generation of poets. They're phenomenal, you know, but then also a lot of Afro-Caribbean poets and in any event. So I want to, you know, point to that. You know, Césaire's writing on negritude and that universal acceptance of an African ancestry, of a needle that points to a home that then the world that exploits us has to respect. That's very important for me. Because all of the little nations in the Caribbean, okay, they're all independent nations, they have the independent flags, but there's a needle that points back to a continent, to Africa. And it's important for me to get that in there. What I was trying to communicate, and the more I look at the book, the more I think of like, oh, you could have done this, you could have added that, right? But it's too late now. I wanted to combine these different worlds, okay, that informed me, but that are also representative of the broader situation. So like growing up as an American in the United States, the African-American civil rights movement is my needle is like my compass for discrimination against me that I experienced because of my skin color, right? So James Baldwin was that compass in many ways. Whereas there's one experience going on in my house, which is, okay, we're Dominican, we're Caribbean, we speak Spanish, we're not Black, quote unquote. But then outside the home, there's a totally different reality for me. Outside of my house, everybody saw me as Black. Nobody saw me as a person from this small place in the Caribbean. And so Baldwin kind of helped clarify, okay, I see what this is. There is a post-colonial struggle going on here. You know what I mean? He clarified this, but by showing me, human nature and his own very detailed experience. But then, of course, if you open your mouth and speak Spanish, at least at that point in time in America, you were Puerto Rican. Depending on if you were in the South, you're Mexican. If you're on the East Coast, oh, what are you, Puerto Rican, right? Because you speak Spanish. So the New Yorican school and movement also pointed me, in a lot of different ways. So what was and then obviously there's the voice of Mama Ana, which is this amalgamation of Dominican motherhood, slash, womanhood in the story. So that Greek chorus, traditionally the Greek chorus was used to talk to the audience about what was going on in the play outside of the play, right? So that, I don't know if you're a Star Wars fan. I don't know if if you like Star Wars, there are these movies, but in the movie Star Wars, there's these two robots that basically narrate the movie as the movie's going along. There's always like a little aside where they stop and they're talking, and they're basically telling you what's happening in the movie. And so I felt like I needed that to kind of guide the reader, to the different aspects of the Afro-Latinx experience, at least through the lens that I could shape it, right? Which obviously is going to be my own experience or the experience of the society I grew up in. So that was very important to me. I'm a huge admirer of Willie Perdomo's poetry and his work. And I immediately, from studying his work, I realized that he uses several guides in his work. And so the Greek chorus was a way for me to kind of incorporate a guide, if I could, to my reader, But I very much wanted this book not to be the kind of book that is like, okay, here's a book from an Afro-diasporic writer, right? Trying to educate white people about this situation. No, I want it to be a Pan-African book that speaks to the African diaspora, where they can see aspects of their culture intersect with other cultures, right? So that's why it was so important to me to be able to include all of those different sources in the book.
Thank you, Roberto. And also, I take this word that you said, sharing the sources, and the references to illuminate.
Yes, very important. Yes, because it's done so much for me to hear, in particular, women scholars, women of color, stand up for themselves and say, I know these people used my material and did not cite me, like that's, and I'm like, you know what, that's terrible. Like, that's bad. It's hard enough in academia, right? It's hard enough.
The pain.
But then people are going to steal your ideas and not cite them. And I saw this, I remember seeing a post, maybe back then it was Twitter. I don't know how popular Instagram was. But I saw a post and I said, this is so important. And I don't fancy myself as a scholar. I think of myself first and foremost as a writer because, that's a whole nother world with another skill set. I know how to do the research I need to do for my writing. So, I think out of respect for people who are scholars, I'm not just going to claim that, right? But hearing, in particular, Black women scholars stand up and say, and call people out not only did that give me not only did it expand my appreciation for citation and making sure, right, that we give credit, but it also led me to a lot of wonderful writers, a lot of wonderful scholars, whom we could spend all night talking about, right? But it led me to a lot. Dr. Vanessa K. Valdez, Yomaira Figueroa, Loria Garcia Peña, obviously, who's done amazing work. Yourself, right? and she just wrote this book, Racial Innocence, Latino. The name is Dr. Tanya Hernandez, right? Kateri Hernandez, Tanya. She wrote Racial Innocence on Latino, racism, which is a phenomenal book. I have it downstairs.
Also, Milagros Record published a book, The Racial Discourse in the Dominican Republic.
Yes. There's, the work being done right now by women of color and the scholarship being done around the subjects I like to write about in particular. So yeah, my next book that I'm working on now, the works cited page is going to be quite long. So
yes, okay. So you mentioned it before the James Baldwin, that is interesting in the dialogue with Mama Ana, that I was going to ask you to share one poem on page 52 that reminds me also with this dialogue that you established with the Pan-African literature or the African diaspora, that you have a conversation not only with New Yorkers like Miguel Piñero and also James Baldwin here in America, but it makes me think that particular poem that you're going to read now, that reminds me to Luis Palés Matos, Nicolás Guillén, and Manuel del Cabral, no? Guillén from Cuba, Palés Matos from Puerto Rico, and del Cabral from the Dominican Republic. Could you please read this poem?
What's the name of the poem?
It's Mama Ana's Flat Nose on page 52.
Mama Ana's Flat Nose. Mama, if we are part Spanish Gypsy, part Taino Indian, why is your nose flat like Celia Cruz? Why's your hair deep waves like Caribbean Sea? Skin never before seen cinnamon. Why do I look like Black Chinaman?
I'm gonna give you a soda.
Mama Pastora was Castilian Gypsy. Hair yellow like piss from a rum hangover. Eyes blue like gunpowder flashing. Skin white like bones in the grave. Papa Africa, Jose Maria, had hair tight as hide stretched over a drum. Lips full like the bellies of slave ships. Skin black like bones in the grave. My flat nose comes from deep inside them. Our skin, nose, and hair an antenna to both ancestors beyond the grave. We're not Black, we're tan. Now cállate.
Thank you, Roberto. I'm ask you to read this poem also because I see another topic that you address. Let's talk about race. That is something that is present in your book, mostly in Black, maybe, no? That we have, but all the chorus also, that conversation and that point that you just read made me think also about the necessity, talking about the resources that you share to illuminate the necessity to re-educate, if I can use that verb,
Yeah.
about white supremacy. That is something that goes through the book with the poetic voice and Mama Ana, and also James Baldwin, that sometimes I laugh when there's one that he has a conversation, no, with Mama Ana, and the page before him, 51, no, when he said, Mamá Ana said, mija, por favor, how many times can I say, no somos negros, no? And Baldwin answered back saying, to be negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time, no?
Yes.
So through this conversation, I would like you not to repeating my questions, no? Is how, o sea, the necessity to re-educate, not only here, but there. When I refer to there, no, I refer to the diaspora here, how we carry that white supremacy also and bring it here and reproduce that. And it's out of the test. Right now, I'm leaving the question out of the test. No, extra literary is the question, an extra literary question.
Yes, no, I think it goes right there with the text, because one of the things, if I, who was born here in the United States and grew up here, had to learn real history, I can only imagine what my mother and grandmother and uncles and aunts, what they did not learn because of the reality, right? The immediacy of their lives, food day to day, work. Like as children, they didn't necessarily get to go to school. They had to work and help my great grandmother. Okay. They lived in a shack that was the size of the room I'm in right now. So if I had to learn it here in a country where everybody believes money grows on trees and, you go to school for free and that life is so great, I can only imagine their experience and what they did not learn. And so it was a constant education process, a constant in my house, right? It was a constant conversation. In particular, growing up, my best friend in the world was African American, right? And so to hear in my house the conversation around my best friend as being almost like from another planet than us, right? Like we're from this planet, they're from that planet. It didn't, I understood it from a cultural perspective, okay, we speak Spanish, they speak English, only English, we're wrestling with both languages, etc. But I feel like this level of education, okay, knowing what the colonial powers were doing. And even I'm still learning. So just to give you an example, I'm reading this wonderful book called We Dream Together about the independence of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And did I bring it up so I'm recovering from... Huh?
Ann Eller is the author.
Ann Eller, thank you. My second bout with COVID has my memory just completely shot. But and I'm continuously learning how in the capital, they were fighting independence from Haiti, but meanwhile, Spain and France and America are making plans daily to take the island over again, to interfere with political processes. And then you have political people on the island trying to hang on to independence, but do enough to please the colonial powers. But outside of the capital, in El Campo, in these rural areas, nobody cares about any of that stuff. They're still speaking Creole, some people, they're still doing transaction with Haiti like regular, right? So how many people know that though? Right? So how many people know that? So I wanted to demonstrate with the poems the narrative that we're fed as children, at least the one I was fed as a child, where, okay, we hide the African part, but we latch on to the European part. Like that's the part. And then don't ever say you're Black, right? Nosotros no somos negro. Whatever it is, we're not African, we're something else, right? Because I think we all recognize that. And then hopefully as the book progresses in that back and forth, that Mama Ana presenting one narrative and the speaker pushing back on that narrative and saying, no, it's not that, it's this, right? Hopefully then that that demonstrates, you know, how challenging it is. But also what I want to show is that it's not just us, it's not just Dominicans, like it's Caribbeans, you know what I mean? Like a lot of the things that go on in DR, okay, you know, we deserve to be the punching bag for, because a lot of the stuff is kind of ridiculous, but this is a Caribbean issue. I think the only country that can say that, the only country that, you know, can, I guess, claim not to have this issue is Haiti, right? Because they have a very kind of strong Afrocentric legacy where there's no denying that connection.
But I'm not sure about that with Haiti, with the mulattoes and black.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they have a class where, right. But yeah, when you factor in colorism and you factor in all of this stuff, the complexities are all there in the DR, and not just in the DR, in the Caribbean, Haiti included, of course. And we have to unlearn.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, and also it's a question of class, because
Say
the
it
way,
again?
like you said, class in the Caribbean,
Absolutely. Yes.
you know how that operate, that is totally different of the,
Yes.
in
Yes.
the United States.
Very different. And Latin America is such a classist kind of society, as it is. But yeah, I think that's one of the most important things. So people might consider me very militant or extremist when I say that, you know, in my view, this concept of, you know, Latinx identity, or this very kind of deep belief in the flags that we wave over these countries, it's kind of foolish, because economically and globally, we are still treated like colonies. So they may not be there with, you know what I mean, on our land, but economically they have us in that chokehold, and they dictate to us, okay, whether it's International Monetary Fund, World Bank, they dictate to us our lives in essence. And so we have to kind of unlearn this narrative of mestizaje, or I say negrizaje, right? where we are so happy about the mixedness as a way to, you know, nobody else believes that shit but us. I'm sorry, like nobody else believes that but us. So we need to keep re-educating constantly, and keep re-educating, and yes, that's at the heart, hopefully at the heart of the book.
Thank you, Roberto. And something that I don't want to leave behind is the question. We promised that we were going to talk about borders, no?
Yes,
Talk about
definitely.
spaces and borders that are present in your book. For example, you show the borders not only from in comparison with the United States versus the Dominican Republic, but inside the countries. No, there are borders inside the countries. And there is a poetic voice in your book that is a guy, the suburban guy, that is present in your poems, and that reveals some contradiction and struggle between, I would say, the assimilation to the white culture, consumerism, and also resistance. So this is a very interesting, it's on page 5, there is a poem that illustrates what I am saying. The title is No Currency. And after you read the poem, I would like to hear what do you think if it will be possible to resist in this condition, no? Talking about how we are thinking that we are living the post-racial moment. Still we have George Floyd, you know, and we have things that happen constantly. And I would like to talk about that. But first, if it's possible to read the poem on page 5.
Sure. So, no currency. My love seat in suburbia is distance, between me and the world beyond the flat screen. A world I'd love to crush like a dictator, a sad dictator. El generalissimo ridiculissimo, for this world where children burn like the dry bush of California countryside, where firefighters come to save the houses and die. From my love seat in suburbia as useful as a clown's nose. After all, who can afford water? I'm a father of 3 growing fat. Meanwhile, hunger is killing nations. Gluttony is killing nations. I wear floppy feet. But as El Generalissimo, I will complete the carnage, the crazy complicity. Ah, poets, we are one and the same. Rabble what you rabble. Divine a poem or a poet for that matter. What you imply is fireworks, but the truth is empty wine bottles. Water is made clear by the current. If it be hell, say it is hell. For my love seat in suburbia, I do nothing. But El Generalissimo can instigate metamorphosis. Kids, what should we turn into? What will become of us? Pass me the remote control. So, as someone who went from, like Harlem, the Grand Concourse, and then like Newark, and then Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right next door to Newark. It's another urban center. To now this nice little suburban town that I live in. I recognize class immediately. I mean, also growing up in America, you recognize class immediately. And so in particular, Melancholia, there's this examination of the aspects of the society that you are constantly being judged on, right? Or measured on, which is economic status or obviously class, sexual, orientation or sex positivity, right? And racial dynamics, right? So the society kind of spins you on that, hamster wheel or whatever. And so a lot of the poems in this book in particular examine that. The speaker is very much out of place in the world. They don't know where they belong. Because like you said, they're cutting across many borders, right? The economic borders, class borders, racial borders. Whereas before, I can remember the culture shock of coming to New Jersey from, and it's still considered, Harlem, but where that part is, like, you could stop anybody on the street and they'll be Dominican, like literally 10 people, right? 8 out of 10. So the shock of seeing other people at school, in the playground, right? Like, I always remember that. And I try to make some of that come through in the poems. But then as I enter corporate America and began to recognize that there's a kind of expectation. They're expecting me to act a certain way, or people like me, in order to, either stay, in order to remain employed at this place, or to move ahead, right? Or whatever that might be. So, I wanted to incorporate that into the poems because it's a very disorienting experience. You're like a person without a country because you're constantly traversing these worlds, that have these expectations. And, for me, I consider myself, this kind of product or byproduct of colonialism. Even though colonialism passed, I exist because of that process. So whether or not I was in DR, I would have been born and raised there, or being born and raised here, the whole condition, the migration of my family that led to my birth here, mother, you know what I mean? It's a post-colonial situation. And so the speaker in that book, Melancolia, is very much a person without a home, without a real home. Is a person looking for is a refugee looking for a nation, almost, right? If I could put it that way. Because there's also a kind of meaninglessness to, you know, suburban life. We find is obviously very comfortable. I'm not gonna be a hypocrite and say that it's not comfortable, right? I'm in a nice room, I got a backyard, I can whatever, barbecue, etc., which I love to do, grow my vegetables, you know. But we are confined in these spaces. And I think there's a poem in there where I say, or maybe it's in Black Maybe, when I'm exploring this again in the essay Home, an Irrevocable Condition, where I say, you know, the clock is a demanding God, right? It demands you get up every morning at the same time, go to work, come back. And you're in your house and the neighbor's like, hi and bye, every day, hi and bye. And so you are a cog. You're a kind of slave to capitalism. You know, you're a cog. Okay, here's a nice, comfortable house. You have your own yard and you can come in here, shut the door, nobody will bother you. But this is the requirement, you know, go do this, and don't necessarily connect with people. And little by little, you start to lose touch with the real world. And you're this clown on the sofa getting your information from the news and nothing else. You know what I mean? Like nowhere else. And so, yeah, I think that turns into this really strange psychological situation that I think is one of the reasons why we're in so much trouble. The United States is in so much trouble as a country, because there's this ginormous disconnect. You have people floating around in el aire, as we say in DR, right? They're just floating around and they're not tethered, and they're crossing all of these borders. Some of them recognize them and know what's happening, and others don't, and they're terrified, and they do crazy things because of it. You know, hopefully that made sense.
It does, absolutely. And reminds me again of James Baldwin, you know, that usually say that when he went to Paris, you know, what you mentioned here, that disconnection, no, because you are always struggling to prove yourself. You mentioned that they're expecting you to act certain way, you know, those divisions, no, those divisions. But I know that, I don't know if we have enough time. I didn't want to close this conversation. There's a lot of things that I have to ask, but I don't think that we have time to talk about everything. I just want to mention, before I ask you to read the last poem, I just want to mention something that is important, and you can talk about that later. It's about the presence of the feminine word in your poetry, in your book. No, Mama Ana, for example, all these tias and the surrounding, you know, that poetic voice. The point I would like you to read is on page 105, and it's The Tempest, and it's part of the last book, Elegies.
Yeah.
And the reason it's talking about how you feel about the son of the diaspora and errancy, no, errand, moving around. Also, there is reflecting toxic masculinity that you have mentioned it here in your. If we need to re-educate about racial narrative, also we need to be re-educated, you know, about toxic masculinity.
Yes.
So please, Roberto, and with that, I don't have any more questions for now.
So it's a very long poem.
No,
so
not entirely, just the one on page 105. That front.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I know it's a long point.
So page 105, and A Tempest, 1. My father decided I would be born at sea, thirsty and surrounded by the risk of drowning. My father was a great sailor, a seaman, navigated only the darkest waters, the sweetest squalls, which is to say he was a drinker like his father before him. And now I had to learn the rhythm of the waves, how a full moon makes water bulge, makes high and low tide. I had to learn to follow stars home to strange ports. My father decided I would be born at sea, so he left me in a dugout, the shoreline nowhere in sight. Thank God for the saints, those monoliths on land, light towers on the sea, and eagles in the sky, which is to say, thank God for mamas, tias, and abuelas. Where would the wandering sailor babies float to without them? Blessed be these lights who did their own time on the sea, who enjoyed a storm or two before the warm hearth of a slick boatsman, who pay their penance as watchers of the sailors' bastards, who drink tears and listen to boleros on Friday and Saturday nights, and yell and scream at us as if we were those lost sailors, and love and protect us as if we were those lost sailors. So oh my gosh, so much to say, right? I think one of the very interesting things to me when I think about toxic masculinity is, or at least if I just think about machismo, right? Let's just say machismo, is how much of it I was taught by the women in my family, right? So I find that, you know what I mean? Like I was, taught you got to find yourself a good woman who's going to cook for you and take care of you. And you're not going to find anybody to cook like me. So, and, like pick up your brother's plate. Don't leave your brother's plate at the table. You know what I mean? Like, so there was that aspect of it. But, I was having a conversation with the writer, John Paul Infante, who also, and I have his book here because I feel like he's just done such a wonderful job with this chapbook. And in it, he's writing about those narratives of mothers and sons. And, it's interesting because it's like a double bind that I feel like our matriarchs are in, where they don't want to put us in a position where we are excluded from the system of manhood, right? Whatever that is, the tribe of manhood. We have to be able to walk into a group of men and be men together, whatever that means, okay? So there's that. But then they also want us to be better than than what our fathers were, at least, I don't know, maybe in my situation, or better than some of the men that are out there. So we're kind of entrusted with this idea that we will be good men to the women in our lives. But there's a certain kind of code that, I guess, un hombre, you still have to be a man. Am I making sense, right? There's a certain kind of level that our mothers, whether they do it because they feel like, okay, if my son doesn't come away with this, he's not gonna fit in. He's gonna be outcast, right? But I have to also ensure that he is better than most of those men, if I can do that somehow. And so this is something I always kind of noticed, because the women in my family were very strong. They were not putting up with men's nonsense. They just weren't. And so they didn't bring a lot of guys around to be around me. That was something they just were not going to do. They were like, if it didn't work out with my parents, it didn't work out. But my mom wasn't bringing a dude all the time. They could, look, this is so-and-so. This is, you know what I mean? Like, and my grandmother was like that too. That just wasn't going to fly. And they were always, I would hear them having conversations and they would say, they would look at me and say, here's this kid. And they say, the worst thing you can do is be un vividor. Like, don't be a man that lives off a woman. Like, you always, take care of yourself. And if it comes down to it, you take care of the woman, but you don't be that, so there was these lessons, but there was also a lot of lessons on things that we consider machismo today that we're trying to move past, I think, in relationships, things that are really kind of hindering us. But I also feel that, at least in my experience, the matriarchs in my family also gave me a peek inside. This is what it means to be a woman. This is what we got to go through. You need to understand this so you can be a better man, and so this is why their voice is always there, because it was always there. For me, my kids always laugh because they're like, Papi, you are always quoting your grandmother like nonstop. Like everything is something that your grandmother said. And I'm like, that was it. The women in my family were mommy and papi, and sometimes tío, and so they had to do that multiple roles. So I'm glad to hear that their voices clearly, you can hear it all throughout the work, because I'm trying to honor them in that way.
They are, absolutely. They are very present. The 3 books, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roberto. Again,
Thank you,
Angie, Dominican Writers Association, and Word Up for inviting me for this conversation that I so much enjoy. And there are a lot of things that we have to continue the conversation, but at another moment, I think. Thank you.
Does anyone
Thank
have
you.
questions? Do we have anyone who has?
Thank you for reading so closely, and for your wonderful, wonderful questions. Thank you so much.
Zaida dug in deep. Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to ask Roberto any questions, or Dr. Corniel?
Somebody said, is this recording going to be available later?
That's a Carolina question.
I think in the chat.
Yeah, the conversation is being recorded, so we will upload it to our YouTube page.
Thank you, Carolina, for dropping the links to all the books I mentioned, because I was trying to remember the names. Thank you so much.
No, of course. It's always my favorite part, just like doing the little research in the background.
Thank you, thank you. So I think all of Roberto's books are available at Word Up. I think you're running out of Black Maybe, if you haven't done so already, but there's plans for that book. Also for translation of the book, so stay tuned for that. We're excited for it. Yeah, so thank you, Roberto and Zaida. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful night.
Gracias. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Gracias. Chao.
Bye.
Good night.